Topic I wanted to talk about on this episode is often how the darkest moments in your life lead to the light afterwards. So often those things that you struggle with lead to actually your life becoming much better. And there's been lots of instances on the show. Obviously, this is a cosmic bridge, so we're talking about the spiritual material balance. But this is a theme that comes up again and again because people that are now living happy lives, feeling very in touch with themselves, being successful both materially and spiritually, they've gone through very dark moments, right? So we've got a million, if you look at all the episodes we got, most people have got a story. And I think most people in life do have a story. And obviously, I think when you do go through these dark moments, it's about how you react to them. Because I think sometimes a dark moment can crush someone, but to other ones, it's like, how can I learn from that situation? And how can I find the light through it? So obviously, Tom, in some of the other episodes we've talked about like your journey with like alcohol, gambling, etc. I know you've had some dark moments with that, but like obviously at the time you were like in a bad place mentally, but like long term, how did going through those things help you?
Two ways that just come straight off the top of my head. I mean, the first is, and we talk about it a lot in some of the ayahuasca ceremonies I do, but the more you know darkness, the more you know light. It's about becoming, because we all have darkness, and it's about becoming friends and close to that darkness and having it as an ally rather than an enemy. I think before, when I went about it, it was just I didn't want to face anything. So I was drinking a lot, I was gambling a lot. The habits in between, were almost just to block out and try and not feel anything I was thinking. But having done that and having gone through that before, and, it works similar in the ceremonies, having seen and felt, just that complete lack of confidence after the amount I was drinking, after the hangovers, after losing money, gambling, because I was feeling terrible and, having woken up on the street corner, having lost my phone and my wallet and anything else. I've been to court because of nothing that crazy, but because of my drinking and having my dad in the back of the court and pleading guilty. That's a really low moment, and it's in those moments you really feel who you are and can kind of choose which way to go. Now, I'm not going to say in that moment that was the pivotal point. I just had so many of those moments where one day I just decided I can't go on and I can't keep living like this, and I made a transformational change to just stop drinking, stop gambling. And then from there, once you've been down at those moments and you begin to climb back up, it's coming back to that snowball. Again, it's just a snowball that breeds more and more confidence because you know what it's like to feel those lows and you don't want to go back there, and the highs are even more beautiful. So you keep building them. The other key one is when you've been there, you're in a better position to help other people who are there, who are in those low moments. And that's something that I love being able to do now as well. I don't know what you've experienced with your darkness.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I think also something to know is like, this is a journey. So like, we're always going to have darkness inside us. So I'm really like, Carl Jung's got this concept, the shadow, which is like all of us have got these parts inside of us, our psychology, our spirit, whatever you want to call it, that aren't aligned with what we're aiming for, right? And that's going to be till the day we die. We can call that like an inner evil. So it's more around how do we like integrate that. And then for me, an example I was thinking about personally was actually when I was at University of Nottingham. So Tom and I knew each other before then, but Tom and I were also at the same university. And I grew up in London, which is like a very, I guess, chaotic, busy city. There's always like people around. And then suddenly I was put on campus, which is like Nottingham campus isn't far. It's probably like a 30-minute walk from town, but 5-minute drive. I felt like a bit isolated, I guess, from the city, and I was also in a halls with no one that I knew. So I guess I became like a little bit like depressed in a way, and I was just feeling quite low. And I remember in that period, I actually got into running. So that was one of the ways I've dealt with it. And to this day, I still run, and I find like running. And we've talked about this before. We talked about meditation earlier, but I think running and exercise in a way is a great form of meditation, because you're actually, one of the reasons people meditate nowadays is because they're spending too much time on their phone or their laptop or work or whatever, and actually running, because you're not looking at a screen or anything, you're outside and you can be in nature if you're running in nature, and like campus was quite green, right? So I remember like running around campus and being like, this is amazing, but it was like having that moment of being low. And we're all going to go through moments in our life where people are, loved ones are going to die, or we're going to go through something. It actually led to that really positive change of like me running and me feeling much better, and that was like a really positive thing that came from like a dark moment. So.
Yeah, and there's been so many examples on this podcast. Colin Glover's one from the strokes and the surgeries and what he went through. He would have as you've said before, every reason to become a victim and criticize that, and instead he used it to learn from and create the amazing life he's living today. Rory from the alcohol. I mean, pretty much everyone, as you touched on at the start, and it's really thanks to that we are who we are today. And so thankful for that, even though at the time it was really not comfortable at the time, the lack of confidence I had, the dependence on alcohol if I went to a new situation. And even now, as you say, I'm learning to work with ayahuasca, and in some of the ceremonies, they're incredibly challenging moments, either for me or helping other people. And as from what I've been through, my experiences, when you really feel that fear, that darkness, that devil that we all do have inside of us. And I know actually a book maybe you could touch on that you talk about a lot. It's The Cosmic Games from Stanislav Grof, and really touches on this. So
100%. So he talks around, it's a bit of a mad concept, which is like, and this is Carl Jung's shadow, like you're never going to be able to get rid of evil. It's almost like, it's a bit of a Taoist thing of you're always going to have this polarity, but it's how can you unify this within yourself? And it's like going to your deathbed, there's going to be things that are going to happen to you where you're going to feel angry. We're all going to feel angry, right? And then we're all going to feel anxiety. We're all going to feel these things. It's not like you're suddenly going to start meditating, or you're going to do breath work, or you're going to do ayahuasca, and all these negative emotions are suddenly going to go away. So it's really more around like, how do you deal with this inner anxiety, inner shadow, inner evil, whatever you want to call it. And then, I was thinking around, just because you were talking about ayahuasca, for me, what ayahuasca did is it kind of made me realize, like, I can, if you try to fight evil, versus trying to think, okay, shine a light on it, going to the light part, then that's going to be much better. Because I think before I was a bit like utopian and naive, and one of the things ayahuasca did is showed me a lot of my own inner darkness, right? Because I think before I was always like projecting evil darkness onto other people, so that was a big journey for me. And I think we've talked about like ceremonies and psychedelics and stuff like that before, but if you go to take ayahuasca as an example, or if you're going in through a process of meditation, breathwork, etc., often a lot of darkness is going to come up, especially if you've had really bad trauma in your life, and it's all about how you deal with that. So you should actually go in with an attitude of like voluntary suffering, which is going to be some dark stuff that's going to come up, but through that I'm going to be able to deal with it and live a better life. So it's more like bringing stuff up, but learning to deal with it in a better way.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. Maybe you'll know, who said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll keep driving your life. I don't know if that's, I think it's one of Carl Jung. Or
it could sound, sounds like Carl Jung, yeah.
But that's really what these practices are helping to do, to bring up what really is locked deep inside of us. And again, it sounds a bit coming back to that woo, that we have this stuff that we don't realize that really is running our life. But we all have it through childhood, through infancy, as amazing and lucky as some of us may have been, or unlucky on the other side. There is all something there, but anything's possible to feel and to go through and to get to the other side. You know, maybe not in every example, but just bringing that up. And the more you become friends with the darkness, the more you become friends with the light.
It's also, getting a bit crazy here, but like often with past traumas, or even things that we think are traumas aren't necessarily traumas. So I'm going to get a bit crazy here with like the concept of time, but we see the past as something static. Like we see the past is the past and it doesn't change, but actually the past is in our mind, right? So we may find something out today that is totally going to change what our vision of the past, because we may remember something actually in a different way to how it actually happened. So I remember hearing this, I was like, this is a mad concept, but it definitely makes sense. The past, we think it's static, but it's not. So you look at that moment, you suddenly changing it, and that goes to what you're saying around making the unconscious conscious, because suddenly sometimes when you make that thing, there's something in your unconscious which you're burying. Suddenly it comes up and you actually look at it through a totally different light. Maybe there was actually someone that was there that gives you a more objective view that tells you what really happened, and suddenly like you deal with it in a different way. So often there's things we look at that would come from the unconscious that we're not even remembering in a proper way as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of this power comes with the breath work and psychedelics and meditation as well. And I'm not the biggest fan of modern Western therapy. I know there are many good ones and good people out there who benefit a lot, but what that does is just scratch the conscious surface of how you're talking very often, as when you get into meditation, breath work, and some of the more Eastern philosophical practices and ways, you can really bring back what you'd actually don't remember or feel on the psychic level to do exactly as you say, bring it up and feel it and go through it. And yeah, that's really why there is power in the presence and in these practices.
Yeah. And I also think it was a good quote I saw the other day. I can't remember who it was from, but it was like, we're all going back to manifestation, visualization. We're always imagining our past. And that goes back to what I was saying, is we're imagining the past versus thinking like really what happened, versus imagining the future. Because imagining the future, often we think we do that in a positive way, whereas often when we're thinking about the past, we're associating it with very like negative emotions. So it's all about being present, right? It's like that stuff happened in the past, but how did it happen? What can I do right now that's going to make my life better?
Yeah, and it's the action. You know, I'm very aware that I've had a fortunate past and fortunate upbringing, but you know, through the work I'm doing, helping and learning with ayahuasca, I've seen some of the most traumatic, and I don't want to name names or go into details, but some of the most traumatic, horrible childhood stories you can ever imagine. And these people come and experience that. And with the guidance and support and therapy, it's not something many of these practices you just go and do on your own, because it can flip the other way. But when done in a controlled and the right environment, can really open up new possibilities to transform how you feel in this present and how the future goes. And I've seen people come and go with just a whole new future of love, life and happiness and letting go. It's not, who said it's not about forgiving the action, but you can forgive the person? I'm a Renato Roby, a great episode. And, you know, it doesn't justify and say, oh, that horrific thing's fine now. Of course it's not, and that should never happen. But you can, these people I've seen go through it have let go of that suffering and that horrible event that's happened in the past to create a whole new future for them through truly experiencing and healing this darkness.
Yeah, that forgive the person. You don't have to forgive the action, but you have to forgive the person. That was definitely a very powerful takeaway. Yeah, and there's also a lot of self-forgiveness as well, right? So like, I think that particular phrase of forgiving the action, you can forgive the person but not forgive the action. You should also do that with yourself, because we're talking around this inner darkness, this inner shadow, right? Yeah. If we all got that, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to do things that we know aren't right. Sometimes it's a spontaneous decision. My star sign is Aries, so one of my things, I can get angry and I generally keep it calm, but sometimes it'll explode, and sometimes in the moment I won't even know like what's happened, and then sometimes I can look back on that and obviously I shouldn't do that again, but I need to forgive myself and not think, why did I do that? What's the point, right? So it's that not forgiving the action, because I shouldn't have exploded, I shouldn't have got angry, but I can forgive myself in that situation. So I think that quote that Renato Roby gave is also good, like for yourself, because we're all going to make fuck ups in our life. We're going to do bad things to family or friends, but it's about changing the actions next time, but forgiving yourself as a person.
Yeah, and the more you do it to yourself, the more you can forgive other people, and the more you heal and transform yourself, the more you can help other people heal and transform. I think it was Gandhi's quote, I think, be the change you want to see in the world. And when you put yourself first, obviously not always, and obviously, if we've got mothers and fathers in here, sometimes your kids obviously come first. But even then, the more you're able to, whilst helping other people, help yourself first, the more you can give to other people.
Yeah. And that's reminded me as well of, we did the episode with the Imam, Syed Razi, and I asked him, because going to the cosmic bridge, the material spiritual balance, I said, there's a lot of people who will go to a mosque in the case of Islam, or in Christianity go to a church, right? Or go to see a rabbi if you're Jewish, and they're kind of, preaching good things of like morals and changing their life in a positive way, but then their actions are totally different to what they're saying, like on a Sunday or, whenever they're doing these things. And I said to him, like, how do you ensure that people aren't just reading a text, which is going to be helpful, but actually implementing into action? And he said the thing, which I really like this answer, really humble, he said, I have to do it myself, because he's like, if I'm not setting the example, how can I expect my congregation to do that? Which I thought was like a really good example of, like, we have to lead by example ourselves.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite episodes as well. And Rabbi Debbie also touched on it as well. So it doesn't have to come from religion, it comes from any walk of life. But yeah, the more centered you are, the more centered you can help other people to be. Yeah.
And I think obviously, there's that phrase, actions speak louder than words. Words are important as well, but we need to set that example for other people. And I think this goes back into what I was talking about, the concept of the shadow, which is that we have to be constantly assessing ourselves in this process of like shadow work, which people call it. It's not like a one-off thing and I've dealt with that part of my subconscious, that anger. These things are going to come up again and again. So you've constantly got to be looking at yourself and doing this like self-assessment of where these things are going to come up. And I think, again, going back to your point, is you're actually going to start to have a lot more sympathy for other people when you see that, because you're going to see yourself in them. And I've thought about this a lot recently. So I'm 34, so I'm not, super old. But as I've gotten older, a couple of people that I've started to have more sympathy for, one of my parents, right? So often all the things, sometimes you can think, oh, they're hypocritical, but I become a hypocrite as I get older, right? We don't always act the way we aspire to. And then even like old bosses, like sometimes I think about old bosses, right? And I have like more sympathy for them now than I used to, now that I'm running my own business, right? And I'm suddenly not the employee. So, and I think you suddenly see a lot of your own faults if you recognize your shadow, and then you can actually be nicer to others when they're like not acting the best way too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've had the same old bosses. So I can touch on some of that, and I can feel it completely, even though we were angry and maybe handled things the wrong way at the time.
Yeah.
There's really a way to look back on them different and not repeat the same mistakes of others, and repeat many more mistakes and learn from those mistakes and just keep moving forwards.
And I think it goes back to what is, because essentially the old boss, Tom and I won't name who he was. If he's listening, he probably knows who it is. But I think it's, again, forgiving the action. Forgiving the person, but not the action, because actually looking at it, his actions weren't right. But thinking about him as a person, that we can probably relate to how he was feeling a lot of the time. But it was, probably we would, and we have done, felt the exact same anger, anxiety, annoyance, but we wouldn't have acted in the same way. But again, we can forgive him as a person, but not the way that he was acting.
Yeah, sure thing. And, we still act like an idiot. I still send him messages like an idiot here or there, and happens less and less. The time to learn from it's less and less, and that's the goal with it as well.
So I think I asked this same question to Kawan Glover, because he's got like a coaching business called Overcoming Adversity, and again, going back to his story, as well as having a lot of medical problems, he also got a lot of medical debt because he lives in the US. And it was his grandma that inspired him to write a book and said, why don't you tell your story? And that was his way of like dealing with what happened and writing out the process. But I asked him, because he's coaching people how to do it, when you're in those dark moments, like, what do you do? What's the first step? But what would like be your advice for, because I imagine, as you said, you're going to, if you're in ayahuasca ceremonies, a lot of trauma, a lot of darkness is going to come up. So how are you helping people through those situations?
Well, the first thing, whether it's applying it to myself or applying to other people, is we talked about this on a previous episode, breathe. Always connect back to the breath. What the breath does is it gives you a moment to pause, a deep breath in, a deep breath out, and then you've created that moment of reaction, of just instant reaction, to buy yourself a bit of time. If you're in the middle of the dark moment, typically what we do is just super fast breathing, which is just increasing the stress on the body, increasing the cortisol scientifically and, you know, emotionally too. And when you can just take a step back, breathe in, breathe out, rarely does something need an absolute instant reaction. Maybe in a life or death situation, sure, but that doesn't happen very often. Breathe, take a step back. And I think Christine, you know, when we're talking about the micro stresses on one of the previous episodes, don't just throw anger back at somebody. Don't sweep it under the carpet as well. If you're not happy with something or somebody, of course bring it up, of course have a conversation. But actually, this is a brilliant one. In South American tribes, in Amazonian tribes, they have things called mambe. Mambe is a substance on the base of the coca leaf. Okay. We've obviously given the coca leaf a very bad name, but when used in its pure form, it's incredibly powerful medicine, antioxidant. You go to Peru and Bolivia, people are eating it all day. What they do in their tribe meetings is they will, when there's a strong topic, they don't start the meeting until everybody's eaten some mambe. And you can't talk when you have mambe in your mouth. It's a powder. So if you try, you like cough it down. And what they do is pass the mambe round and round in a circle. And sometimes they go round 5 or 6 times. And it's actually just... because when you're sat there in a circle round the fire, all on the same level, and you've taken an hour to eat this naturally beneficial plant altogether, the emotions have calmed down, the respect's increased, and you've come from it from a place of, you've given yourself a space before reacting. If you just get round a fire and start shouting at each other, or, you know, see the pictures of Parliament on the news sometimes, it's an embarrassment how they are.
Yeah. Well, going to that, actually, I've never done this. My partner and her brother recently did this, is like silent meditation, because I know you've done silent meditation retreats. I just thought of this because you were talking about, you know, essentially that waiting to react, right? And I think, I can't remember who was, I think it was Christine Armstrong was actually talking about this in the workplace. We can take this outside the workplace. If someone comes to you with anger, don't come at anger back, because it's just going to like act with calm and say, hey, you know, like what's going on, and have a conversation in person. But going to what you were saying, in that instance with the tribes, silent meditation, is that part of it as well, that like you're kind of learning not necessarily to always just speak up, or like how did that work?
I guess they're brother and sister, and the silent meditation is just sort of like, it's like being in the gym, you know, you don't just build muscles overnight to do a professional boxing match. You have to train and train and train. Silent meditation's just helping you to train the muscle of the mind to not instantly react. And with the stories of the tribes, I mean, it's really a form of brother or sister of silent meditation, because you can't talk. You have this powder in your mouth, and you have to meditate. So yeah, it goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and obviously I think that whole, you know, silent meditation is now a thing people are doing for who maybe aren't religious, some type of spiritual practice. But in religion, it's happened for years. There's loads of like monasteries, for example, that are like silent, right? And I guess it's probably a lot more difficult to react in an angry way if you can't necessarily shout at someone.
Yeah. But you know, the key we always talk about, so I know many people who meditate who then just shout at people without thinking, and I know myself sometimes I do that, but you know, it's about you just keep moving forwards, making the mistakes and learning from the darkness, and finding the light and learning from the light.
I think so the thing Kawan's answer I really like, and again it was really one of those like moments for me, a bit of an epiphany, and I was like, that's so true, is we often treat other people better than we treat ourselves. So the advice he gave is like, if you were suffering, or if a loved one you know is suffering, how would you treat them? And he was like, you should treat yourself the same way. You should give yourself that same respect, that self-love, because often we don't in those situations, which was very interesting. So it's looking at it from that like third eye perspective, because sometimes we get so swallowed up in our own shit, we don't like look at it like that.
And we get swallowed up, you know, we don't give ourselves the time to do any of this these days, because the world has a mobile phone addiction, the world has a social media, a porn, a drinking or whatever else addiction, and then there's no time to really treat and look at ourselves and give ourselves the space too, on top of, you know, not treating ourselves with love. We don't even give ourselves the moment to do that.
Do you think that stuff's always been, I mean, obviously like gambling, alcohol addiction, etc. It's just, I guess, now we've got just a new addiction, right? We got this screen addiction, you know?
I think it makes a massive difference. I really think that's a reason we see more depression, anxiety, disconnection. I think pornography comes in there. It's an addiction. We've talked about on the show, phenomenal episode with Ian Cognac, but it's another massive one that needs to be talked about more and more. Yeah,
100%. But yeah, I think maybe main takeaway I'll give is that the Amaranato Roby episode, his advice, which was very simple, which was, you know, for forgiveness, which I think when we go through dark episodes, sometimes we blame ourselves as well. So one, you can forgive yourself. You don't have to forgive the action of the person, and you can also forgive the person. And that's a really good way of dealing with it, whatever the dark moments are. And also knowing long term, often the way you react to that dark moment, it's actually going to lead to a lot of light. And that's pretty much been a constant theme throughout the Cosmic Bridge. So yeah, if there's anyone you know who's going through a particular dark moment, and if you like this episode, hopefully it's helped you, please share it with them. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, your favorite podcast platform, and we'll see you next week.